Alright, we got a very interesting and somewhat sad industry insight to talk about today. If you missed the news yesterday, Visceral Games, the makers behind Dante's Inferno, I believe Battlefield Hardline, and most famously Dead Space 1 and 2, we don't talk about the third one, was closed down by EA. At the moment, they were working on a yet unnamed Star Wars project, which was going to be a single-player action-adventure driven game. And while the studio's closing is more than enough to merit talking about it, there are some more, I guess we shall say, disturbing reports from reasonings for the closure. There have been, now of course, a lot of this is hearsay at the moment. We'll probably hear more confirming information later this week. But there have been talks about some of the reasons cited as to why EA is closing Visceral Games now. One of the big ones is the fact that they didn't like having a single-player focused game. There was also talks about not having microtransactions and not being friendly towards streamers or stream-worthy games, which that could be an industry insight topic later on. But the catching point, though, has to do with single-player design. As we've seen over the last decade, the move towards games as a service and long-term game development has certainly shifted what people think and expect out of video games. It's no longer about you getting just an 8 to 10 hour experience and calling it a day. Now, we need to have months of DLC, or a multiplayer mode, or simply just design a multiplayer game to begin with. And probably one of the more red flag statements from the closure is that EA is taking the Star Wars games or the Star Wars game, and they are restructuring it to make it more open, which is pretty much a code word for multiplayer. And taking a narrative or single-player driven game and turning it into a multiplayer experience, that sounds very bad. And of course, it's too soon to say, but my money is not on that being a Game of the Year winner anytime soon. But Visceral Games has certainly been kind of the, I wouldn't say poster child, but somewhat of an example of kind of how EA has been mishandling some of their franchises. As we famously have talked about before, Dead Space 3 was pretty much shot in the back before it was even released, with reports of it being forced to have microtransactions, co-op gameplay, more of a gritty Gears of War action-based theme, and of course the very famous report that EA said that if the game didn't sell at least 5 to 6 million copies, it wasn't considered profitable. Think about that once again, a single-player horror game trying to sell 5 to 6 million copies as a multiplayer or just high-octane first-person shooter. So the game was pretty much DOA upon minute 1. But this is causing some talks, especially on Twitter among developers, about kind of the changing scope of AAA development. Over the last 30 years, single-player design has been it. We go to the AAA for these 8 to 10 hour blockbusters. The Last of Us, Horizon Zero Dawn, the Uncharted series, Ratchet and Clank, Mario, Zelda, you name it. And it has worked. But it hasn't been immensely profitable. And when you see games like Star Wars Battlefront 2, PUBG, and so on earning lots of money, or even from the smaller side, or quote-unquote smaller side, like Riot Games, Overkill, and the like, who are able to take this game, or take a multiplayer game, and oh, my mouth just completely died on me there, and basically keep it going for years. In fact, as of the time of this recording, we are about to hit the 4-year anniversary of Payday 2, and they're having another Crime Fest event, which is basically a week or 10 days of free updates. So these games that manage to stay in the long term, and again, games as a service, certainly have earned back their money and then some. And as we've said before, it's a lot safer to develop a game or a popular game as a games as a service model rather than having to create a brand new IP. It basically goes in terms of risky to less risky, brand new IP, direct sequel, games as a service. And It seems like more and more publishers want to go with the safe bet. But the problem, though, is that single player design and multiplayer, as we've seen many times over, don't necessarily gel together. We've used this example before from Spec Ops The Line when the lead designer called the multiplayer a cancerous tumor on the game experience. And we've seen games that have had a built entirely for single player and have had a very much tacked on multiplayer, or a multiplayer game that, in order to try and earn a little bit extra money, had a very bare bones single player campaign, or having a single player option that is just woefully less than adequate, such as with Payday 2 and trying to make use of the AI. But the case here is that single player games still hold value. I mean, as we've said before, Nintendo has certainly made their living off of titles like Mario, Zelda, Metroid, and the like. And again, it's just very interesting and somewhat telling that EA is trying to restructure things further. A few weeks ago, we did the Dissecting Design on Dead Space 2 from Visceral. I hope I just said that right, and if I butcher that anymore, I do apologize. But Dead Space 2, or the first two Dead Spaces, I should say, were really solid horror games. And I know for myself, and I'm sure for some of you watching this, we were all really excited to see this work. Because Dead Space came out during that weird period when a lot of Japanese developers said that they didn't want to do horror anymore. And while the Dead Space series certainly does fall into the action side of survival horror, it still delivered a very solid universe. The idea of fully integrating the UI elements into the character in the game space, which we talked about in the Dissecting Design, I think that was the first game to do that. And for anyone watching this, please correct me if I'm wrong. There was a game earlier that built the UI directly into the character. You know, you had like the health bar running along his arm, or ammo, as a hologram above the character's sight, or stuff like that. And Dead Space was very original. The necromorphs are a very great and creative enemy side. Definitely more than just your traditional ghosts and zombies that we saw from Japanese horror games. And when the series decided to, jump the necromorph with Dead Space 3, a lot of people turned away from it. And I didn't even think about this before, but Visceral Games also made Dante's Inferno, which I actually liked that game in some weird sense. It just had a very awe-inspiring design to it. And maybe at some point we can do a Dissecting Design if I can ever get it to work. In fact, I should probably get my collector's edition out, because that would make the perfect little icon over there. So maybe I'll do a quick cut here, and I will be right back. Alright, I'm back. Just pretend I teleported away and came back. But here's my copy of the Divine Edition of Dante's Inferno, which apparently came with a free reprint of the original Dante's Inferno poem. Which maybe at some point I should actually take a gander at that. But when it came to Visceral Games, they've certainly had a very interesting mark in terms of the AAA market. And despite working on Battlefield Hardline, I believe, they've certainly made a successful name for themselves in the single-player field. But this does raise some very major questions as to going forward with EA's plans. Are we going to see more single-player driven games from the company? And more importantly, are we going to see more single-player driven games from the AAA space? A few people on Twitter were kind of talking about this, saying, is Nintendo the only one who still feels comfortable in the AAA market, in the single-player AAA market? Because obviously, at the time of this recording, Super Mario Odyssey is coming out soon. Breath of the Wild was kind of the it game of the summer period, and Nintendo has always been a huge proponent of single-player driven games. And if I wanted to, we could probably segue into talking about my love of single-player games, but that's probably a little bit too big for just this one video, and we're trying to keep this in the industry perspective. But with that said, though, EA has certainly earned a reputation as the studio killer. In fact, fan here, El Gordo, linked me to a little video, a little poster of all the studios that EA has killed. And looking at this again, it's kind of like a gut punch. So they've killed, of course, Origin, Westwood Studios. I can't read that one. Criterion Games went out. Wow, I didn't even know that one. Of course, Maxis, as we know it, is dead. Bullfrog. BioWare, one of the BioWares. Mythic Entertainment. Pandemic was out, and I love their games as well. The LucasArts game division branch, and of course Black Box. And speaking about the LucasArts games, that brings up another point. A lot of people were really excited to play a single-player driven Star Wars game. The last one that was out was the Force Unleashed, which last I heard didn't do too well. But getting back to the main topic before we wrap it up for today's video. Single-player driven games require a different touch compared to multiplayer. I know that's a very big shock for those of you watching this. You're defining an experience that will have to last between 8 to 10 hours or more, and there's no additional wrapper or buffer to deal with that. In the sense that if you're playing a single-player game, you're not necessarily really caring about the multiplayer all that much. There are multiplayer-driven games that are just exclusively for that. And I think this is kind of where EA's business kind of model is trying to go forward. Because it is a lot easier to extend a multiplayer game than it is to extend single-player. Not only that, but you can do a lot with less when it comes to multiplayer. A really good example, of course, is the overwhelming success of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds being released in early access with just one map. You don't need to create 10 to 20 different levels of event-driven combat if you just have one overarching map for a multiplayer game. I mean, hell, League of Legends with the Summoner's Rift lasted for a very long time. In fact, for any League of Legends fans watching this, are they still using just the one map, or have they expanded things more since I last looked at it? But the point is, multiplayer has certainly become the big ticket. And someone else was joking on Twitter about that maybe this means that single-player driven games will become the new indie scene, now that basically the indie's going to take that over. But this does raise, as we've said, some serious questions regarding the future and support of single-player games. Will the next Assassin's Creed game be an online multiplayer title? Will we ever see another game like Horizon Zero Dawn or nuts, I forgot already. The game that just came out from Ninja Theory about mental disorders. The point is, when it comes to the AAA market, they have the big budgets needed to bring some of these games to life. I don't care how great you are as a game designer, you are not going to physically or digitally recreate Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild graphics to graphics with an indie budget. And if the rest of the AAA scene decides to move out of this, with probably good exception from Nintendo, it's going to leave a lot of AAA studios kind of forced to deal with a square peg in a round hole situation. The Star Wars example from earlier is really good as well here. It doesn't sound good that they're trying to take a single-player game and turn it into a multiplayer experience. That just sounds all kinds of bad. And we've talked about that before as one of the major red flags of game development. Shifting a game's scope halfway through, changing a game engine, and even just literally adding more stuff on and delaying a project by another 2 to 3 years. They've actually said in the news report that the Star Wars game probably is not going to be out until sometime after 2019. And I don't even know how long it was in development beforehand. So that's going to be a lot of time and money wrapped up in a single project that will probably have to earn anywhere from 5 to 7 million copies to even be considered profitable. But it's certainly going to be one of those days. So, if anyone from Visceral Games is watching, I do wish you guys the best of luck. If you'd like to come talk to me about the studio or game design, again, my door or virtual door is always open. And let's at least remember the good times of Dead Space 1, 2, and at least for me, Dante's Inferno. So, with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Industry Insight. Be sure to check back daily for more discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. For my writings as well as weekly podcasts, check out game-wisdom.com. For ways of supporting Game Wisdom and get access to rewards such as VIP status, as well as voting for the Saturday Night Grab Bag, check out patreon.com/gwbycer. You can follow me on Twitter at gwbycer for my daily thoughts as well as updates as to what's going on. So thanks again for watching, and be sure to check out our next video coming real soon to the channel.